This is Covering the Spread, part of the FanDuel Podcast Network.
The new league year in the NFL has officially just begun as of a couple of seconds ago. So curious where all these big name players will go, as if it was not decided a couple of days ago already. But it is time now to discuss the biggest winners and losers of free agency thus far across the NFL. Talking through the Seahawks and Sam Darnold, what to make of the Vikings under JJ McCarthy, and much more by talking to Meghan Payton of FanDuel TV and getting her initial reactions to what's happened thus far in the NFL. Welcome on into Covering the Spread, a FanDuel Research podcast. My name is JimSannes. I am a managing editor for FanDuel Research. Joined here, as mentioned, by Meghan Payton. You can find her on X at Meghan Payton7. Find her on FanDuel TV as well. Meghan, happy new NFL league year to you. How you doing today?
Thank you. You too, Jim. I feel like I constantly have to have just push notifications on, and I'm looking in the corner at all time to make sure that nothing else is breaking even during this show. But good to be talking football. I feel like this was one of the busiest free agencies that I can remember, which is always exciting during a quiet time.
Yeah, it looked like initially like it was going to be a pretty quiet thing because you look at the free agency list, there's not a lot of big names, but then you have, I think honestly, the Geno Smith trade catalyzed things being a bit more exciting than the DK Metcalf trade happened too. So honestly, had it not been for that, it might have been a bit of a snoozer, but that added to the Sam Darnold intrigue. It got us to think about the Raiders in a bit of a different way. So I want to think the Seahawks are being like the catalyst of making this free agency be pretty interesting.
They absolutely were the catalyst, and it's always a ripple effect, and that's what's always fun about the NFL is one team just decides, hey, we're going to go about free agency this way, and then, I don't know, 6 or 7 teams are affected because of that, and some for the better, and some probably not for the best.
Yes, and we'll talk about both ends of that spectrum throughout the show for today, talking about just thoughts on what we've seen so far, which teams have seen their stock go up, and which teams have gotten some downgrades here of late. We'll see which bucket the Seahawks fall into as well. But first, a quick reminder to make sure you are subscribed to the FanDuel or the Covering the Spread podcast feed wherever you get your podcasts. Next week, going to be a big one here on the feed. We're going to have 4 separate shows getting you ready for NCAA tournament season, both men's and women's shows across Monday and Tuesday, breaking down some individual betting games as well for Wednesday and Thursday. So a lot of good stuff here coming on the feed next week. If you want some thoughts on both NCAA tournaments, just search for Covering the Spread wherever you get your podcasts. Hit subscribe if you like what you hear. Leave us a 5-star rating and review as well. As far as NFL stuff goes, I'll be back with you on Friday breaking down my initial win totals for this year. We're not going to talk about like specific ones too in depth because win totals are not up at FanDuel Sportsbook yet, but kind of go through the teams that have seen the biggest gains, biggest decreases as we get more information throughout the week. So that'll be Friday over on the YouTube page where you can find all of the NFL shows for what we're discussing. Also, final plug here for YouTube. The FanDuel Golf Betting YouTube page has our thoughts on the Players' Championship. If you want to bet that on a TPC Sawgrass, as you can see that I'm sunburned. That's because of TPC Sawgrass yesterday, hanging out there with Rob Gronkowski, Will Zalatoris, Jordan Spieth. I am very burned. I am very sore, but it was a fun time. You can get your bets in over on the FanDuel Golf Betting YouTube page and hopefully make my pain worth the while by doing so and checking out the heat check for all your golf needs. One of the best parts about the tourney is when an underdog takes on a powerhouse, and right now, those upsets can get even bigger because all this week on FanDuel, if your underdog bet wins, you'll land even more winnings with a profit boost. This is your chance to ride with the long shots, the scrappy teams, the ones that refuse to go quietly. If you've been waiting to join FanDuel, there is no better time. The app that's easy to use, and when you win, you'll get paid instantly. Visit America's #1 sportsbook and back your dog of the day with a profit boost. Because after all, anything can happen in March. Must be 21 plus and present in select states, or 18 plus and present in DC. Opt-in required. Wager of at least plus 100 odds required. Bonus issued as knowledgeable profit boost tokens. Restrictions apply, including any token expiration and max wager amount. See terms at sportsbook.fanduel.com. FanDuel is offering online sports wagering in Kansas under an agreement with Kansas Star Casino LLC. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. or visit FanDuel.com/RG. Call 1-888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org/chat in Connecticut. Visit M&D Gambling Help Oregon, Maryland. Hope is here. Visit gamblinghelplinema.org or call 800-327-5050 for 24/7 support in Massachusetts, or call 1-877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY in New York. Now, Meghan, let's begin things here with the quarterback movement. Of course, the big one is Sam Darnold going to the Seahawks, traded Geno Smith for a third-round pick over the weekend. How are you viewing Seattle with so much changeover across Sam Darnold, Tyler Lockett, DK Metcalf, etc.?
There's a lot of different ways to view Seattle. And frankly, we can all have our different opinions, but we're not in the locker room. We're not in that GM coach room to actually know what the motive is behind it. But the way that I see Seattle after getting rid of Geno, picking up Darnold, trading away DK, not necessarily that they're in rebuild mode, but they are telling us without telling us Geno to them isn't worth a lot. Isn't worth keeping, isn't worth getting that third contract. I mean, they literally took a third-round pick for him. So clearly they don't value Geno Smith in the way that they would if they thought he could be a franchise guy. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that they view Darnold as a better option than Geno. And that's where I think some people are getting a bit confused. That people are saying, well, is Darnold better than Geno? I don't think that that's really the point. I think the point is that Darnold is younger, Darnold's cheaper, and Darnold's a bit unknown. Like we know right now, and I think the Seahawks know, Geno Smith isn't going to be your franchise quarterback. He's more of that bridge quarterback, if you will. But he was going to be a really expensive bridge quarterback and was expecting, I think, around like $40 million. So for Seattle, if they don't think that he's going to lead them to, I mean, they won 10 games, so it's not like they had a bad year. But if they don't think that he's going to elevate this team and you're not going to keep DK around, or well, let's try it out with Darnold, who's still really young. I think that we already saw that there were going to be some issues with DK and with JSN taking on more of that number one role towards the end of the season anyway. Don't think DK was going to be okay with that. Obviously, the Metcalf rumors were happening even at the beginning of the offseason. I actually like what Seattle's doing. I think it's kind of rebuild without going full rebuild and keeping still some really good pieces. The receiver position does worry me now because, I mean, outside of JSN, like Bobo, like they need to go and get another wide receiver. But I'm okay with the fact that they're going to bring in a Darnold, and in return, they're going to have to trade up Geno.
Yeah, I think that honestly, Geno Smith's issue is that he played too well. He played too well to be that bridge quarterback, as we were discussing him, where he's a step above that. He's not what the Vikings thought that Darnold was entering last year. And that's kind of the way that he was viewed in a lot of ways. It's like, okay, let's ship him somewhere where they will view him in a way where he's like a half step above that bridge quarterback. He can be, an older version of Baker Mayfield, where he is a guy who you can have as your actual starter for like a non-1 year plan and stuff like that. And Seattle didn't view him that way, for better or for worse. Like you said, Darnold is still very young. He came into the NFL before his 21st birthday. So he is like absurdly young still, despite the fact this is his fourth or fifth team at this point. So there is still some potential there. I'm curious for you. Do you think we can see, like, what percentage of Darnold can we see relative to last year when you take him out of this Kevin O'Connell scheme, take him away from Justin Jefferson, take him away from Jordan Addison? Can we still get that same Sam Darnold in Seattle, given that the infrastructure there is not quite as good as what he had in Minnesota?
Probably not. I mean, there was a chunk there where Darnold looked as good. There was a chunk, not saying he is. There was a chunk where he was looking as good as any, top 5, top 10 quarterback. And then obviously even in Minnesota, where all of the pieces and the coaching is almost as good as you're ever going to get it. Even with all of that, we saw the drop off, and the drop off was really, really hard. And in return is probably what caused him to actually leave Minnesota. Now you go to a team that's not as established, that doesn't have Justin Jefferson, yes, has JSN, but who alongside JSN? I think you could say the offensive line isn't as strong as it was in Minnesota, and the offensive coaching definitely not as strong as it was in Minnesota. Having said that, I think Sam Darnold's ceiling is Baker Mayfield. What's his floor? Sam Darnold with the Jets. Like there
Right.
is a gap in the market here, and ultimately it's a low risk and potentially a, I wouldn't say high reward for Seattle. It could be a decent reward. I mean, if Baker is your ceiling, I mean, look at the Bucks. Like me and you've been really
Yeah.
hyping up Tampa all year last year, and I think the Bucks are going to look good this season as well. So it's more about the low risk for the Seahawks. And while they're trying to navigate a younger team, I mean, you've got Schneider, who's been there for obviously a long time, Mike McDonald, new coach for Seattle, last year kind of getting through some of the kinks and everything. But I think that ultimately this year will be the telltale sign of what Sam Darnold is actually going to be and what the rest of his career is going to look like.
Yeah, I agree with that. We're going to get a better read on him this year than we did last year. So I think that thought is fully true. It'll be fun to see what he does, but it'll also be fun to see what JJ McCarthy can do. The Vikings are a very different team now than they were entering free agency. They've added a lot up front, some big ticket free agents on the offensive line, also along the defensive line. But it's also an unknown with JJ McCarthy. I really liked JJ McCarthy coming out as a Minnesotan. I was pretty excited to see him go there too. But now it's like, okay, chips are on the table. It's going to be a big test of what he can do there. So what's your view of the Vikings with McCarthy now, we assume, being the starter there for 2025?
Jim, I think the Vikings are one of the most unknown teams and it's giving me flashbacks to last year talking about the Vikings. And I mean, they were projected, what, 5, 6 wins? No one thought that they were going to be as good as they were because of the loss of JJ McCarthy. Sam Darnold came in and he went on quite a run for a while. Now, if McCarthy hits, Vikings are in a great situation because all the money that they would have spent on Sam Darnold, they went and boosted their interior offensive line, which is going to give more protection. They re-signed Aaron Jones, who had over 1,100 rushing yards last year. They still have, honestly, they have maybe the second best wide receiver duo in the league outside of Jamar and T with Addison and with Justin Jefferson. You could argue A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith are up there as well, but everything on offense, if JJ McCarthy is good, this team is right back in the playoffs. If he's not good, they're in big trouble because everything you've spent this free agency to get that offensive line to retain Aaron Jones, if JJ McCarthy isn't what they expected him to be coming out of the draft, maybe if he has a lingering injury or just isn't as good as they thought he was going to be, then you're in a big problem. And you don't have Sam Darnold now to come in and prove to be maybe a more stable guy. I think I'm really interested in the Vikings. I think that the public's going to probably favor the Vikings, in the offseason when those win totals come out. I'm interested to see where FanDuel actually projects them. If I were to project right now how many wins the Vikings have, I have them at about 9 as their ceiling. And I think it could be 6 or 7 if JJ McCarthy isn't good.
Well, we are in lockstep because I have 8.5 for them right now.
All right, there we go. Yeah.
I've got it right at 8.5 for them. And again, that's because the infrastructure is very good. Like I like JJ McCarthy, but also have to keep in mind, be realistic and say, okay, this guy didn't play at all last year. He was not a top 5 pick. He did slide a bit in the draft. And the further you fall in the draft, the lower your odds of hitting are. Now, that's been less true recently. We've had Josh Allen go 7th, Patrick Mahomes went 10th, Lamar Jackson went 32nd, Jalen Hurts 52nd. Like you've had a lot of successes outside of the top 5, but historically the hit rate goes down the further you fall. And the fact that McCarthy fell to where the Vikings picked him it's noteworthy. I still like him. I'm still excited, but I have to keep that realism in mind that, like, yes, there are still paths to failure here. So as high as I am on the Vikings and as high as I was on McCarthy coming out, 8.5 to me feels right. Smack dab in the middle. If he exceeds expectations, oh baby, they could go nuts. But there is a downside too, like you mentioned, where there are a lot of ways in which that could be a very, very interesting and maybe not fun year for the Vikings too. Now let's talk about another team that's made some big moves along the offensive line. Ben Johnson bringing in some old friends. They've got some beefed up front for the Bears in front of Caleb Williams. And Williams, still a guy I have a lot of interest in, trying to bounce back for this year. What do you think Williams can do in his sophomore season, given all the moves the Bears have made up front?
Well, Caleb Williams is going to have to do a lot because now the pressure's on him. He doesn't have the excuse of coaching changes or the excuse of offensive line. And look, I'm not knocking on Caleb Williams. I do think it's tough when you're changing coaches your rookie season, when you don't have a good line, and when you're already going into. I mean, you were the highest expectation we've seen in probably 10 plus years for a quarterback. Obviously, that sets you up for just disappointment. I really like what Chicago's done. I think Ben Johnson's doing everything right. Lions had the best offensive line last year. Ben Johnson's now trying to up that position. And then in terms of receivers, I mean, they've got an all-star cast, and now they get the Lions wide receiver coach who is a culture changer in his own. Caleb Williams, now pressure's on. Like that's how I view this team. And I think that they are set up for success. Luckily for them, I still don't think that, outside of the Lions, I think that they're in a pretty good situation in the North. I don't think that the Vikings will probably be as strong as they were last year. I think the Packers might even fall off a little bit. Speaking of like losers in free agency, I don't think Green Bay did enough. So if you're battling with essentially Detroit and Chicago, and Detroit just lost their offensive coordinator to Chicago, it does help that situation out. I'm interested to see the Bears. If Caleb Williams can improve and become a little bit more accurate, then that's going to help. But ultimately, Ben Johnson has done everything since getting that job so far to put Caleb Williams in the best position possible.
Yeah, they're doing what they can. And I think that's a credit to them, is they are controlling what they can control. And that is getting Joe Thuney, getting Jonah Jackson, getting Drew Dahlman. They've rebuilt they've replaced all three interior offensive linemen. And honestly, their tackles are pretty good. It was the interior that let them down last year. So they said, okay, we're going to keep DJ Moore, keep Rome Odunze for you, and give you solid guys at all five positions along the offensive line. If you want to set a quarterback up for success, that's what you do. And they've done that. So they're controlling what they can control. And I still think Caleb Williams is good enough to do well when that environment is good. So I think that he can do well. My concern is the schedule the Bears face, because Meghan, let me read to you the teams the Bears will face on the road next year. I was like, my jaw was dropping. Okay, this is the teams they'll face on the road. Detroit, Green Bay, Minnesota, obviously. That's in the division. Other road games. They get Lamar Jackson on the road. They get Joe Burrow on the road. They get Jalen Hurts on the road. Jaden Daniels on the road. Geno Smith now on the road at the Raiders. And then the Niners, who have taken some steps back in free agency for sure, but are still a Kyle Shanahan coach team with a lot of good pieces. That is easily the toughest schedule in the entirety of the NFL. So while the Bears are a better team, I'm concerned, Meghan, because that schedule is brutal. So they could be a better team, and I'm worried that the results may not reflect the fact that they are tangibly better because that schedule is so difficult.
I mean, that's a tough schedule. My biggest concern, just when I look at the Bears as a whole, and I think I said this right when Ben Johnson took the job, is now let's just live in this world. Ben Johnson makes all the right decisions. But if Caleb Williams isn't what Caleb Williams was thought to be, does that in turn, affect Ben Johnson getting another coaching job? Because, as much as he's been the most hyped offensive coordinator in the last few years, how does that translate to him being a head coach? I think he's making all the right decisions, but you see it all the time. If you don't win in your first couple of years as a head coach, like that reflects on either the quarterback or the coach. So how are the Bears going to, establish that culture and say, who are we putting this on? And I'm going to be watching Caleb Williams with a, extra focused goggle lens, because I ultimately do think Ben Johnson is the right guy for the job. And I've got more concerns about Caleb Williams than I do Ben.
And as someone who wants to watch good NFL, like I want to watch a good product out there. I want to watch good football. I want Caleb Williams to be good because I think he's a very exciting player. So I'm pulling for them. But yeah, it's put up or shut up at this point. So we'll see how things go for the Bears this year. All right, Meghan, so we're talking to some of the most intriguing teams across the NFL. But I wanted to pick your brain about which teams got the biggest boost based on what you've seen so far in free agency.
All right, so I've made my list here. I've got Steelers boosted up. I'm interested to see what they actually do with the quarterback position if Rodgers goes. But Mike Tomlin we talked about this, I think, a couple of weeks ago. Mike Tomlin is the kind of guy that if Rodgers does end up in Pittsburgh, I think that he's the one coach that I'm
Correct.
saying, hey, you know what? Maybe you can handle Rodgers. If not, is that going to be Justin Fields? But DK Metcalf obviously boosting that roster. Interested to see if anything happens with Pickens in the next couple of days. I do think that they've boosted their room. I like what the Vikings did. We just talked about it. I like the idea if JJ McCarthy is everything that they hoped he would be, then I think Minnesota's in a really good situation. Raiders have done everything they can to improve their stock. Pete Carroll coming in, getting a guy he's extremely familiar with in Geno Smith. I think between those two and Chip Kelly, who has been amazing with young players, tough division. They've done a good job. I'd give my biggest A right now, probably outside of the Bears as well. I think the Commanders get an A.
Yeah.
I really like the addition of Larry Tunsil. I think that Debo is one of those players that fits the Commanders' offense really well. You already have Brian Robinson there. You've got Terry McLaurin. You've got Jaden, who can take off running on his own. I think Debo rolls in what he does best as a guy that's, can be used as both a running back and a receiver, but yards after the catch, yards after contact. I hope that can set him up for a little bit more success than, obviously he's had success at the Niners. Just last season wasn't the best, display of that. I think that he goes to a good situation with the Commanders. And I do think that the Broncos did boost their defense as well. And I like the addition of Dre Greenlaw.
They did not need the boost. They were already very good. So it's very scary to watch that defense. I keep I adjust whenever a team signs a new player, and I keep making the Broncos defense better. And I'm like, I can't keep going. I can't turn that dial too much further. So they're doing good work over there for sure. With the Commanders, like the Larry Tunsil trade broke my heart, given that we're CJ Stroud fans here on the podcast. I know that last year was not good. I know last year was not good, but jettisoning everyone, purging everybody from that offensive line does make me a little scared. But as someone who also loves Jaden Daniels, okay, I can get behind that too. And I think, like you said, it's a good fit for Deebo Samuel. He's not going to be, they don't need him to be the guy here. He has a quarterback who is the guy. Terry McLaurin is the guy as well. And also Deebo's coming off a year where he had pneumonia midseason.
Yeah, that's
so
true.
The struggles are pretty easy to understand. So I think buying low on him in general made sense, especially what they gave up for him. They're paying a pretty large salary still, but also they had salary to burn given their cap situation. So I think I'd agree with you that Washington definitely got a big boost there. And I'm excited to see what that now more veteran-based team with Tunsil and Debo in there could do for this year. What about the flip side, Meghan? Who got the biggest notch down for you across the early part of free agency?
Well, you mentioned the Texans. I definitely, as a supporter of them on the podcast, don't love the fact that they're going to be without a lot of those key offensive linemen. And I don't love the fact that they just kind of, I know they didn't blow up the team, but they definitely didn't take the approach of hey, let's build off of what we have and maybe, fix a couple key pieces. They felt like sellers in this free agency, which I didn't love. I think that the Niners probably take the cake for biggest loser. For me, I think Green Bay is up there. But for San Francisco, it's just the situation that really, messes with my brain, because you're going to be paying Brock Purdy a pretty big paycheck. And yet now you're not going to have Debo. You're not going to have Juszczyk. You don't have Collins. You don't have Leonard Floyd. You're losing so many key players that, as much as we can say, oh, it's a Kyle Shanahan offense and Kyle Shanahan can do this and this and that, but he can't make Brock Purdy a top 5 quarterback. And he can't, I don't think so. And he can't, expect Brandon Ayuk to be the only guy. I mean, Ayuk definitely underperformed last season. I think that he hopefully will step back just a little bit this season, but you're losing so many pieces. We knew this was probably going to happen because of that closing window. Obviously, they couldn't afford all these pieces. It's not like they wanted to get rid of everyone. But ultimately, I look at San Francisco, who's coming off of a disappointing year. And now it looks like even more of a down year than what we saw last season to me.
And I'm curious, too, because it looks like they're going to put a lot on Brock Purdy's plate, because you think back to like the old school Kyle Shanahan successful mid-range quarterbacks, and they had Jimmy Garoppolo. It was, okay, we're going to be a very efficient running team, and then ask Jimmy to move the football when we're forced to. But now, when you take away Juszczyk and you take away Debo, that rushing efficiency comes down a bit. And you look at like the remaining guys. Kittle's still an amazing run blocker, but Brandon Ayuk and Ricky Pearsall are more guys who are like, they're more tailored for pass heavier offenses. And I find that very interesting. I'm kind of curious if they change stylistically and become less of that old school Kyle Shanahan team where it's this team that is, you fear them most on the ground. And do they shift to a more, not like obviously an air heavy offense, because I don't think Kyle Shanahan would ever do that, but do they put more on Brock Purdy's shoulders? I kind of think they're going to. I don't know if that'll work out. I like Brock Purdy, but we haven't really seen him in that kind of approach yet, outside of parts last year where it didn't go super, super great. I think that he stepped up, but also the overall team wasn't as successful there. So I'm very curious how the stylistic mesh of the Niners changes, given that a lot of the guys they lost are guys that fit that old school mentality of, we're going to put the fear of you-know-what in you with our ground attack. I don't know if that's the personnel they have right now.
That's exactly right. It's all these moves that the Niners are making go completely against Kyle Shanahan's style of offense of run the ball, play action pass. You don't really have to have these, air yards of 20 plus because you're dominating on the ground and you're getting those quick passes off. That's going to be a lot tougher now. And so what does that mean? That means Brock Purdy's faults are going to be more on display. Every knock, and I hate the term game manager, I really do, but everything that Brock Purdy, the concerns for him, even coming out of the draft to the first season, that's now going to put the pressure on him. And so, look, the Niners are doing this for a reason. Obviously, they didn't have the cap space to retain everyone that they had 2 years ago. We knew that that was coming, and that's why everyone always talked about as the Niners Super Bowl window closing. And that's why last year was such a disappointment, because we knew that this locker room wasn't going to look the same for the 2025 season. Having said that, maybe Kyle Shanahan's laughing at all of us going, yeah, I know that like you guys put me in this box of run heavy play action pass. Well, guess what? Like I can run different styles of offense, and maybe we'll see a whole new look San Francisco team. I think that's what we're going to have to see in order for any hope at the Niners bouncing back from last year.
Yeah, I always want to remind myself of that. Kyle Shanahan's genius. Don't doubt him too much. Like I need that like a sticky note on my like lights here saying like, don't doubt Kyle Shanahan too much. It always works out in the end. So it'll probably work out. He's way smarter than I am. So yes, it's a good reminder that like it's Kyle freaking Shanahan, and he's seen Brock Purdy in practice every day for the past 3 years. Maybe I should trust him at a certain point, but it is definitely uncharted territory when it comes to the Niners. That is all that we have here for today on Covering the Spread. As mentioned, though, I'm going to be back with you on Friday. I'll break down my kind of wrapping up free agency thoughts as we get a couple more moves here between Wednesday and Thursday. I don't put a bow on free agency there, but then next week is the big week with those shows getting set for the men's and women's college basketball tournaments, all on the Covering the Spread podcast feed. Go there, hit subscribe, leave us a 5-star rating and review as well. And of course, the Friday show will be on the FanDuel Football Betting YouTube page too. Meghan, appreciate the time as always. Thank you for swinging by. Enjoy the rest of free agency. Enjoy the basketball tournaments too. Hopefully have some fun watching those. We'll talk to you once again soon.
Thank you so much, Jim. So much going on right now. I'm excited to see where we end up in a couple of weeks in terms of NFL news, trades, free agency. It never stops.
It never stops. The NFL never lets us get bored, and I'm eternally grateful for that. You can find Meghan on X at Meghan Payton 7. Find her work on FanDuel TV. I am on both X and Blue Sky at JimSannes. You can find FanDuel Research on X at FanDuel Research. Big thank you to our YouTube producer, Justin Lane, for his work on the video side of things. Thank you, Justin, as always. And thank you to everyone for tuning in. Enjoy free agency. Hopefully get some more chaotic moves before Friday. We'll talk to you all then to wrap it all up. This has been Covering the Spread, a FanDuel Research podcast.